Radio MD.
RadioMD.com.
It's time for the Dr. Lee Vinokur Show. Here's Dr. Lee.
Hi, and welcome back to the show, Health from the Outside In on Radio MD. My next guest, Dr. Joel Seedman, is here to talk about an interesting topic. We hear about it in the news. Athletes talk about it. Muhammad Ali, Russell Wilson. Can sex really take the edge off your workout? I guess there's a difference between, just you going to the gym or doing a 5K versus, Russell Wilson being in a Super Bowl a competition,
right.
But it's still an interesting topic. What is the story? Because, as a physician, there's just so many studies, yet nothing really definitive that I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's, I think people either find this to be a very interesting, fascinating topic, or sometimes they can find it to be a little bit awkward and uncomfortable to talk about. But either way, it's a fairly complex topic, and I think there's multiple factors that come into play. You have to look at the physiological components. You have to look at psychological, the hormonal effects, as well as the ethical and moral aspects of sex, and particularly as we're talking about here before workouts and before competitions and sports. So one of the issues, though, is the research with this topic. It's often difficult to perform because you pretty much have to tell a large group of men that you can't have sex for a certain period of time, and that's going to be the control scenario. So oftentimes men simply don't want to participate in a study like that. I'm sure you can understand why, for obvious reasons, but
Right.
So, the research, there's really not as much as we'd like to see. There just needs to be more. So, but
So
we have enough, and we have some experiential data as well from different athletes. So, from there we have some different insights.
So, and your doctoral degree is in kinesiology. So do you, have you worked with athletes? I mean, you think it's become, more of a lore, among athletes. It's this idea with this pent up sexual frustration just makes them, more aggressive. Is that a psychological thing for them? It feels like it gives them an edge versus, whether it really bears out testosterone levels.
Yeah,
I've seen
that's
studies.
a great question. I mean, I work with high level professional athletes every day, and like I said, my degree and my PhD is in kinesiology, particularly in sports performance, athletic performance, and the topic of pre-competition or pre-workout sex. It is very important to discuss because it's one of those components, one of those factors that can have an impact on an athlete's performance. So let me kind of first answer part of your question by stating what's typically been assumed for the last, not just decades really, but for the last several hundred years, if not longer. It's really been thought that once an athlete, and again, I'm talking a little bit more about men here in the male population, but once they have sex and reach that orgasm, that testosterone levels, it's been thought, okay, and assumed that they immediately dip and that it can take 1 to several days for those levels to rebound. Now, I don't want to say that's entirely an outdated or, antiquated way of thinking about it, because it's actually somewhat true, but it's not as simple as that. If we look at the research, it's actually somewhat mixed. And it's basically, if we look at, there's pretty much two different types of research we have to look at. The first is if we look at the effects of sex on testosterone levels and look at testosterone levels immediately after sex. It shows there's really not a significant difference or drop in testosterone levels immediately after. Now, if we look at another type of research and we look at where they examine abstinence for a period of several days, for up to several weeks, there actually shows a significant increase or boost in testosterone levels. So, that's something that you have to look at with the research, that there is different types of research out there, and it is kind of split. So it's not so much about looking at, what happens to testosterone immediately after an athlete has sex. It's more about looking at, okay, does abstinence actually help improve testosterone levels? And the answer is it actually does. So in one sense, we can say, okay, well, having sex doesn't really produce a drop in testosterone levels. But if we're talking about doing everything we can for a professional athlete or even just a typical trainee to maximize their performance, abstinence does seem to have a little bit of a positive effect.
So abstinence for how long before an event? Say you're going to run a marathon, because there aren't a lot of us that are high-level professional athletes. Is this something that we can use, in our everyday? We're going to run a marathon, a 5K, whatever. We want to get our best time. Is that something we can use, and how long should you abstain?
Yeah, so typically anything 24 hours or less before an intense athletic competition or even a very intense or strenuous workout is generally not suggested. Basically, one day or obviously longer is going to be best, but there's athletes that, I've often been asked, hey, coach, how is it if I have sex, 12 hours before, the night before, or even the day of? That's typically what we want to stay away from, because that could potentially cause some type of dip in testosterone, and based on experiential data from different athletes and even coaches, it's something that we tend to see, even if the research doesn't always support that. So again, as long as it's 24 hours for the most part, that's going to be ideal.
So 24 hours is what you would recommend to your athletes?
That's what I recommend, or longer. I usually like to say to play it safe, 48 hours, but, sometimes with high-level athletes, I want to be realistic in my recommendations, obviously. So, and a lot of the guys that I work with are NFL guys. So, I'll give them the 24, and if it seems like they can handle that, and, I'll throw out the 48 hours, but I don't always get that exactly. But yes, exactly 24 hours or more.
Okay. And, but truthfully, as you said, we don't know how much this is also creating a psychological edge, because how much, that's a good question. How much is your performance tied into your psyche?
That's a huge part of it. And obviously, you have the typical theories that have been going around for decades. Hey, don't have sex right before competition. It's going to lower your testosterone. And the athletes have heard that for so many years. They're pretty much indoctrinated into that theory, and they're going to think that even if it's not true. And that's going to have a significant impact. We know the placebo effect is significant. Right. But then you have athletes that, that doesn't affect them quite as much. But, I think part of it too has to deal with, the different activities that often go, are hand in hand with, maybe one night romps or one night stands or different types of sexual activity that aren't necessarily with a consistent partner or with a spouse. They often involve partying, drinking, and different, maybe even, drugs. So it's those things right there that may actually be playing a role as well. And you also have the mental components, like you mentioned.
And I know you're primarily talking about men, but we know women do have certain testosterone levels. I don't know if anyone's ever studied women athletes that are high performing. We only have about a minute. Are their levels probably a little higher than maybe other women? And do you think that it would pertain to them a little bit?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Like I said, there's not that much data and research on men, but there's actually far less on women. It's almost non-existent, unfortunately. And I'm talking specifically about pre-workout sex. In fact, there's some anecdotal evidence we're talking about from Rhonda Brewski saying that actually sex seems to help her performance. So it may actually be
not in the last fight, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Not in the last fight. So we need more data on that. But right now, it may be the opposite, but we're really not sure.
Okay, well, thank you. Very interesting topic. This is the Dr. Lee Vinokur Show, Health from the Outside In. Stay tuned into your health.